What if I told you that the way you love, the way you fear losing love, and even the way you pull back from it is not random? That behind every argument, every unmet need, and every longing for closeness lies an invisible blueprint that was written long before you even understood what love was. This blueprint is called your attachment style. And two of the most powerful, most common, and most misunderstood styles are anxious and avoidant. Together, they shape the way millions of people experience intimacy, connection, and heartbreak. If you've ever felt like you love too much, or like you struggle to love at all, this story is about you. Attachment theory begins in childhood, in those fragile early years when your nervous system was still learning whether the world was safe or threatening. If you had unpredictable caregivers, sometimes available and warm, but sometimes distracted or distant, your nervous system adapted. It learned that love must be chased, earned, and held onto at all costs. This is the seed of anxious attachment. People with this pattern often grow up to feel an intense fear of abandonment. They worry about being too much or not enough, about being left behind, about being forgotten. Their relationships are often filled with highs and lows because their need for closeness feels endless. And even small signs of disconnection can feel catastrophic. On the other side, if you had emotionally unavailable caregivers who discouraged too much neediness or who responded inconsistently to your emotions, your nervous system adapted in another way. It decided that needing others is dangerous, that love can't be trusted, and that independence is the safest strategy. This is the avoidant style. People with avoidant attachment often seem strong, distant, and self-reliant on the outside. But beneath that independence lies a fear of being overwhelmed, fear of being trapped, fear of losing themselves in closeness. For them, intimacy feels threatening, not safe. Now imagine what happens when an anxious and an avoidant person falls in love. At first, it's magnetic. The anxious person is drawn to the avoidant's independence, mistaking it for confidence. The avoidant is intrigued by the anxious person's passion and emotional intensity. But soon, the cycle begins. The anxious partner craves closeness and reassurance, sending messages, seeking affirmation, and asking for more time together. The avoidant partner feels smothered, withdrawing, needing space, pulling away. The anxious partner senses this distance and panics, reaching out even more desperately. The avoidant withdraws further. This dance, sometimes called the anxious-avoidant trap, is one of the most painful and common dynamics in modern relationships. What makes it so destructive is that both people are trying to protect themselves. The anxious partner is protecting against abandonment. The avoidant partner is protecting against engulfment. Yet their protective strategies fuel each other's deepest fears. The more the anxious clings, the more the avoidant retreats. The more the avoidant retreats, the more the anxious clings. It's a cycle that can last for years, leaving both partners feeling exhausted, misunderstood, and unloved. But here's the key truth. Neither the anxious nor the avoidant style is who you truly are. They are adaptations, survival strategies your nervous system built to keep you safe in a world that once felt unstable. And just as they were learned, they can be unlearned. This is where awareness begins to transform everything. When you start to notice your patterns, noticing that your panic after a delayed text is not about the text itself, or that your urge to withdraw after a conflict is not about the other person's words, but about your old wiring. You take the first step toward freedom. Understanding anxious attachment means recognizing the longing for connection beneath the fear. It means seeing that your intense emotions are not weakness, but sensitivity, an antenna tuned to the slightest shifts in closeness. Understanding avoidant attachment means recognizing the fear of losing yourself beneath the distance. It means seeing that your independence is not a flaw, but a shield you built to survive. When you see the humanity in both styles, compassion grows for yourself and for others. Think of it this way. The anxious partner carries the wound of "I am not enough to be loved" consistently. The avoidant partner carries the wound of "my needs will suffocate or drive others away." Both wounds are tender. Both deserve healing. Both can learn slowly how to trust again. But the first step is simply noticing. Noticing when your nervous system is in fight or flight, noticing when your old patterns are running the show, and pausing long enough to ask, is this reaction about the present moment or about my past? Attachment styles are not cages. They are starting points. They explain why you may feel the way you do, but they do not have to define where your relationships end up. The anxious can learn to self-soothe, to regulate their emotions, to give love without losing themselves. The avoidant can learn to lean in, to allow closeness without fear of engulfment, to trust that vulnerability does not mean weakness. Healing is possible. Transformation is real. But it begins with understanding, and understanding begins here, with the story of anxious and avoidant attachment. But what happens when the anxious and the avoidant actually come together? At first glance, it might seem like an impossible match. One craves closeness while the other fears it. Yet in reality, these two styles are often magnetically drawn to each other. The anxious person feels an irresistible pull toward the avoidant, believing that if they can finally win this distant partner's affection, they'll prove they are worthy of love. Meanwhile, the avoidant feels strangely comfortable with someone who takes the lead in pursuing closeness, because it allows them to hold back while still being in a relationship. It creates a dynamic that is both intoxicating and destructive. The anxious person texts, calls, and worries. They sense distance, and their instincts tell them to push harder for reassurance. The avoidant, feeling overwhelmed, withdraws even further to protect their independence. The more one chases, the more the other runs. This cycle can go on for months, even years, leaving both partners exhausted and confused. And yet, the chemistry feels undeniable. Why? Because deep down, the anxious person's wounds are triggered by the avoidant's silence, while the avoidant's fear of being consumed is triggered by the anxious person's pursuit. It's like two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly, but in the worst possible way. If you've ever felt trapped in this cycle, you know how painful it can be. It's not just about arguments or disagreements. It's about the deep fear of abandonment on one side and the fear of suffocation on the other. Both fears are powerful. Both feel real. But neither leads to peace. The truth is, until these wounds are acknowledged and healed, the anxious will always feel they're too much, while the avoidant will always feel that love is too heavy. So, what can be done? Is there a way out of this endless dance of chase and retreat? The answer is yes, but it begins with awareness. Attachment theory teaches us that these patterns are not permanent labels. They are survival strategies shaped by our earliest experiences. And just like any strategy, they can be unlearned, reshaped, and transformed. For the anxious individual, the first step is learning to soothe their own nervous system without always relying on external reassurance. This means pausing before sending that 10th text, breathing through the panic of imagined rejection, and reminding themselves that love doesn't disappear simply because someone is momentarily silent. Journaling, therapy, and mindfulness practices can all help create space between fear and action. Slowly, the anxious person learns that they are worthy of love without constantly needing to prove it. For the avoidant, the challenge is different but equally vital. It involves recognizing that closeness is not a trap, but a choice. Emotional intimacy is not a threat to freedom, but rather a deeper form of connection that can actually strengthen independence. The avoidant must learn to sit with the discomfort of vulnerability, to open up even when it feels dangerous, and to trust that allowing someone in does not mean losing themselves. It's about replacing the reflex of withdrawal with the courage of presence. When both sides take responsibility for their patterns, something beautiful happens. The anxious learns to stand steady in their own worth, while the avoidant learns that closeness doesn't mean drowning. The cycle of chase and retreat begins to loosen its grip. And for the first time, the relationship has a chance to feel balanced, safe, and real. Of course, not every relationship will survive this process. Sometimes, the anxious and the avoidant remain too locked in their roles, unable or unwilling to change. And that's okay, because healing isn't only about fixing relationships with others. It's about transforming the relationship you have with yourself. When you understand your attachment style, you stop blaming yourself for every failed relationship. You stop seeing love as a battlefield of fear and start seeing it as a mirror that reveals what still needs healing inside you. Imagine this. Instead of anxiously chasing, you sit calmly with yourself, knowing your value doesn't depend on anyone else's response. Instead of running away from love, you lean in, letting yourself be known, even in small steps. That's the true power of attachment awareness. It doesn't just explain why we suffer, it shows us how to grow. And so, the anxious and the avoidant are not enemies. They are teachers. They reveal the deepest wounds we carry, and in doing so, they point the way to healing. To love is to risk, to open, to grow. But to love wisely, we must first face the patterns within us. So I want to leave you with this question. Which pattern do you see in yourself? The anxious, the avoidant, or maybe a mix of both? And how has it shaped your relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story might just help someone else feel less alone. If this video gave you new insight into your relationships, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more deep dives into psychology and human nature. And remember, you are not defined by your wounds. You are defined by your ability to grow beyond them.